They don't allow dead animals in human hospitals, so instead we've come here to a veterinary center where former military surgeon Dr. Villa is going to scan this pig and see what kind of damage the musket ball did to the bones and internal organs.
But before that, Dr. Villa talks me through something else he's spotted.
I think let's start, if I may, actually with the clothing or the blanket in which the carcass is wrapped. And the first thing to look at are these holes actually in the blanket. And they imply that pieces of clothing may well be found inside the animal.
Surely that's not too big of a deal.
It is a very big deal because this cloth will be contaminated. You may well have a soldier. He's been living rough for 3 or 4 months. He may not have washed. His clothes are dirty. It is covered with every bacteria that God ever created. And then look at this. Look at this. Here we've got what I think is a fragment of cloth.
It's almost gone all the way through.
It did indeed, and throughout its passage, it will have been distributing bacteria and infection as it travels.
But of course, infection wasn't the only way these new gunshot wounds could damage your health.
So what do we look at next?
Well, I think having seen the carcass itself, the next logical step would be a CT scan.
A scan which should show us exactly what happened as our musket balls tore through the carcass.
Well, we're looking at the animal carcass passing through the scanner. We're looking here at the entrance point of the musket ball, and here at these dark cavities, which are going to contain probably a lot of bacteria and debris. There lies your infection risk. It is a ricocheted off this vertebral bone just there and changed direction.
Just tore right through all this soft tissue. I mean, it didn't cut through at all, it just ripped right through.
Yes, it demonstrates the huge amount of energy possessed by that musket ball as it strikes living tissue. If you look in the very center, that's where the spinal cord sits, and that's completely damaged. And so, were this a human being, this individual would, at best, be totally paralyzed, at worst would have died, because some of the major blood vessels to the rest of the body lie just here, to the front of that vertebral bone. The individual more than likely would have bled to death at the time of wounding.
Boy. So, what I've learned is that for a frontline soldier, getting hit by a musket ball means that your chance of survival is pretty slim.
But little by little, those odds began to improve. Back in the 16th century, field surgery is a primitive and grisly business, until one battlefield surgeon develops a more effective and humane way of treating gunshot wounds. His name is Ambroise Paré, and his new techniques will go on to save countless lives and become the blueprint for all modern surgery. But Paré's surgical revolution would also be the link to a new and scientific understanding of the human body. I've come to the magical Renaissance city of Florence in Italy, home to some of the most famous representations of the human body in the whole history of art.
It may seem strange to us now, but up until the 16th century, most people didn't have the faintest idea how the human body actually worked.
Artists and sculptors could create the most beautiful representations of the human form, but no one really knew what was going on inside the body.
For more than 1,000 years, physicians based their anatomical knowledge on the dissection of animal organs, with the result that most of their ideas were hopelessly wrong.
But the new breed of surgeons and anatomists is determined to put this right. One of them is a Belgian called Andreas Vesalius. Vesalius is a fan of Ambroise Paré's surgical techniques and believes there is only one way to really learn the truth about the human body. And the legacy of that new method can be seen here at Florence's Natural History Museum with its amazing collection of wax body parts.
This is fantastic. Just
Just look at the amount of detail that's in here. All the ligaments, all the veins, even the muscular tissue is striated. And one of the reasons for that is that they're based on dissections of real human bodies, something that Andreas Vesalius would certainly have approved of.
In the 1540s, Vesalius persuades the prison authorities in his hometown to let him take home the bodies of executed criminals and dissect them. From these dissections, Vesalius creates detailed textbooks filled with the most incredible illustrations of his work.
What Vesalius showed for the first time ever was an accurate depiction of the internal workings of the human body. And that enabled later anatomists to make these wax models.
So how have we got to this point? We began our story with the Chinese discovery of gunpowder, the legendary fire drug that gave rise to not just new weapons like the gun, but also new types of wounds, the treatment of which by battlefield surgeons was the link to a fresh understanding of human anatomy. Armed with this new anatomical knowledge, people now began to think about the human body in a whole new way, one that is still driving technology today: as a machine.
Okay, gefahren, shit.
This is Roland Justin, one of the most sophisticated robots in the world. 3D stereoscopic vision, massive parallel processing power, reaction time of 1 millisecond. Which means if I throw this ball, he can catch it.
Justin's success rate at catching balls is more than 80%, which is quite an achievement. And he's part of a program here in Germany to produce a new generation of robots for use in space.
We like to think of robots as a purely modern invention, but they're not. The idea of mechanical devices that mimic human movement is hundreds of years old, and it comes straight from Vesalius's dissection of human bodies.
Inspired by Vesalius's anatomical drawings, the philosopher René Descartes developed the radical idea that the body be viewed simply as a machine, one that could only be called human when combined with a soul.
Thinking of the human body as a purely mechanical system was one of the defining ideas of the 18th century. And one of the first ways that people put the philosophy into practice was with toys.
Inventors began making automata, mechanical toys driven by clockwork that mimicked the movements of the human body. The more automata they made, the more sophisticated the mechanics became. Until what began as a philosophical idea had turned into a revolution in mechanical design. One of the pioneers of this new clockwork world was the French engineer and inventor Jacques de Vaucanson, who, during the early part of the 18th century, became famous across Europe for his highly intricate and lifelike automata.
But it's not for his automata that de Vaucanson is a crucial link in our story. It's for what he does next. And we can see that in here.
This old silk factory in Florence is one of the few silk works left in the world that still uses machines designed and built in the 18th century. Around about the time that the French king, Louis XV, impressed by de Vaucanson's genius with automata, hired him to come up with a technology to modernize the silk industry.
One of de Vaucanson's inventions looks so modern, it's hard to believe that he came up with the idea as long ago as 1745. Check this out. These are punch cards, and they control the design that the loom makes. Now, 200 years later, computer designers use the exact same idea to store programs and data. But it's de Vaucanson's use of a different technology that interests us. It's this, the chain drive, used here. It may not look like much, but it's set to become a vital link in our story.
While the idea of a chain drive had been around since the ancient Greeks, the technology had never really taken off.
But de Vaucanson has the genius to realize that he can use the chain drive to mechanize part of the silk weaving process. Unfortunately for him, his invention goes largely ignored. But by resurrecting a technology which had lain dormant for years, he opens the door for its use by others, culminating in an invention which will change the course of human history.
And it all starts with the humble bicycle. One of the earliest bikes on the market was this, the penny farthing.
I don't know why anybody would ride one of these for pleasure. It looks like an absolute nightmare.
Best of luck.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, off we go. Just take it gently. Keep your head up.
But the problem with the penny farthing was that its entire mechanism was fixed around the front wheel, which made it incredibly unstable.
That's fantastic.
That is a nightmare to ride.
But then, in 1885, an English designer called J.K. Starley invented a bike with pedals linked to the rear wheel by a chain drive.
This is so much easier to ride. It's not comfortable, but at least I'm not falling off.
Starley's safety bicycle became the blueprint for all modern bikes. But the mechanism behind it was destined for even greater things.
The chain drive's another great example of a simple but brilliant idea that then finds loads of applications. And one of those applications is about to change the world.